Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Bright Founders Talk at Temi. Temi is an international software development company that designs, builds, and delivers software for sustainable businesses and promising startups. My name is Matthew, and I'm very excited today. I'm joined by Mr. Ben Jones, who is the co-founder and head of sales at a company called Moddule. How are you doing today, Ben?
I'm good, thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Ben, before we get going, would you like to tell our viewers a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do?
So I'm co-founder and head of sales, as you said, here at Moddule, and I am part of a team that's built a platform to help the supply chain industry by making it really easy for teams to manage global and complex supply chains from one single platform. I handle the customer facing side of the business. So I'm quite heavily involved in sales and business development, customer conversations, ongoing feedback from customers and partly managing those relationships. I'm based in London, but we're a team that's spread throughout the world across various continents. And that's kind of the role I carry and a little bit about me. I've been in the industry for about 15 years now, and that's sort of the industry has taken me across Asia and Europe and various countries and cities to bring me to sort of where I am today.
Wow, that's incredible. So you've traveled a lot. You've been doing this for 15 years. Can you tell us a bit about your career? Maybe you could share some key moments with us, things that played a pivotal role in your development and your preparation in your position today.
Yeah, sure. So I started my career in Hong Kong. So I worked for a very large international freight forwarding and logistics company. I started as a trainee and kind of worked my way through that role into a more sales focused role. So I joined the sales team, and the vast majority of my career was in Hong Kong. And I think being based out there and being exposed to different ways of working and different cultures really actually set me up quite well for the rest of my career. I learned a lot in that period, and I was exposed to people and different ways of working that I don't think I'd have got elsewhere. So that was a really pivotal moment for me. Was actually sort of carving my career out in Hong Kong. And I did that at various organizations out there, but always sort of staying in Hong Kong until I left. So in my 13th year, I left Hong Kong and I moved back to London. But certainly the exposure to, I think, culturally different approaches to business and different sort of, I think, types of businesses and working with different types of businesses, it was really key for my development, I think. And I worked for some great leaders as well out in Hong Kong. And so just being around those and being exposed to those, I think was kind of what led me to where we are today. There's a real entrepreneurial spirit in Hong Kong. And I think that just by osmosis, I think that has an impact on, when you're exposed to that, naturally, I started to consider, maybe one day we could, under the right circumstances, I could, start something along with the right team. And lo and behold, we did that eventually. And I think Hong Kong was a real kind of a really strong influence on the entrepreneurial part of founding our company.
That is insane. And when you got to, I just want to touch on that a bit. When you moved to Hong Kong initially, did you speak the language? It must have been quite a shock at first.
I didn't speak the language at first, no. But Hong Kong is such an international hub that, plenty of people speak English in Hong Kong. And I think I was willing to just put myself in outside of my comfort zone. I think, I headed there straight out of university, not really knowing what I wanted to do other than I knew I wanted to get exposure to something outside of the UK. And I think pushing myself past my comfort zone actually has been a key driver for, sort of some of the achievements I've had in my career along the way. And it still is today, right? I think that's really where I found the most growth, is putting myself in slightly challenging situations. And the move out there was one of them, completely unknown to me. I didn't know anybody out there when I moved. So it was completely foreign culture to me. And of course, there was the language barrier to a certain extent. But even, I think, starting my career in the shipping and logistics industry, that even started with me reaching out to people in the industry and expressing my interest to join it. That in itself was a step outside my comfort zone for someone who is a typically a bit of an introvert in that respect.
Yeah. And 13 years in Hong Kong, you obviously did a great job. Now, you spoke about some of the challenges, and if you could we perhaps talk about some of the challenges that you face when it comes to dealing with companies, achieving end-to-end supply chain visibility, tying everything together? Because it sounds like there's a lot of moving parts over here. How do you deal with those?
It is an ongoing challenge. The supply chain industry is built upon fragmented systems and platforms and partners, and it's largely remained unchanged for a few decades now. It's one of the final industries that is yet to be fully transformed by tech and to fully leverage tech. Now, tech is on the increase in terms of its use in the industry, but it does, as I said, it remains fragmented. That in itself poses a challenge to a lot of companies, because that then means they have to deal with multiple partners and systems. Data tends to be spread around. It's difficult to get a total overview. So if you imagine a supply chain as a single linear horizontal line from a supplier all the way through to the doorstep of somebody who orders a product online, a particular product moves along that line and passes through different partners and systems along the way. And it's difficult to get a total overview of all of that data following that product through the supply chain. This is a headache for companies. They tend to manage their supply chains on spreadsheets, and that's okay. But spreadsheets often can be subject to human error. They sit on desktops and things like this. And so still to this day in our industry, it is a headache because there's a few bottlenecks along the route. Now, what we're trying to do is plug those gaps by bringing all that data together so that it makes it really easy for somebody to log into a single place, or a team to log into a single place, and see all the way through from start to finish in the supply chain exactly what's going on. Can we see any issues ahead of time before they have knock-on effects further down the line? Can we all collaborate from one single place where we share data and we get full transparency and visibility? And it means that single source of truth so that people can just make better decisions, really.
Absolutely. So talking about all those moving parts, you're talking about different companies in different countries with different cultures and different people, and you've got to tie all of this in together. Can you talk to us about finding this balance, getting the sales through, getting the companies on board, and your role at Moddule with balancing all these intricacies?
Yeah, it can be a challenge. In terms of, if we start with getting the customers on board, it's always focused around, for us, the pain points and the issues that the customers have. Because we knew from the start that the challenge wasn't building a great product and expecting people to come, because we knew that wouldn't happen without first understanding the pains of the customers and leading with those pains. So we've always really put the customer at the forefront of what we do and built a product to solve those particular pains. Now, it sounds obvious, but oftentimes there are a ton of companies that say, right, okay, we're going to build a product, we're going to throw it out there and see what sticks. Now, for us, we knew that wouldn't be the case. So we took the time to fully understand the customer and what does their day-to-day look like? What are their headaches? What's the real visceral pain that stops them from being fully productive, or means that they have to deal with fires they need to put out every day when they get to the office? And let's build a solution around that. And so to acquire customers, we lead with those pains. So when we speak to people, and that could be, via various sort of outbound sales methods. When we speak to them, we talk to them in detail about the typical pains we see. Are these the pains that they also experience? And if they are, we dig into the repercussions of those pains and the impact it has on their business. And then from there, we then go into more detail about the product itself and how the solution could potentially solve some of the issues and challenges they face. And then from there, it tends to be about bringing more people from the customer's organization into the sales process, so they fully are on board with what we're looking to do for them, right? Because one pain for one person in the organization doesn't mean it's a pain for another, right? So everybody seems to bring their own challenges to the table. So it's also about addressing all the stakeholders within an organization and making sure that everybody's comfortable that Moddule, in this case, can solve a problem for them. And then together, collectively, if everybody says, right, yeah, this all makes sense, that we'll take the next steps together. But it is a challenge, especially internationally, when you're dealing with multiple teams and multiple partners. It's really important to take the time to virtually sit with each individual stakeholder and have these conversations and make sure that everybody on the customer side feels like we understand where they're coming from and the issues they have, and that we do in fact have a solution that can solve their problems.
So that would also mean then, correct me if I'm wrong, that would also mean then that you would have to, through one of these chains, starting at one end of the world and using multiple means to get a product or a service to another side, you as Moddule would have to incorporate all those different pieces along the way and speak to them and say, this is what this client's looking for. We're here now because you're part of this and we want you to be involved in this way. Wow.
Yeah. Yes. If you look at, if we take the external partners and platforms that a company would use in order to move their products from origin all the way through to the doorstep of a consumer, they are companies like logistics and freight forwarding providers, right? So freight forwarders that move containers from, let's say, Shanghai to a port in Europe. That's then handed over to a warehouse. That's another third-party provider usually. And then from there, when an order is processed at the warehouse, so when you order online and you order a t-shirt, that goes through to the system in the warehouse. They package it, put it in a box, and that then is handed over to another provider, which might be a courier, right? Like a DHL or a FedEx. So, and that's a simple supply chain I've described there. So even in that scenario, we have 3 different partners. So there's a process there where we have to integrate and potentially bring on board the partners that exist within their supply chain. So not only are we convincing the stakeholders at the company about Moddule's solution, there is sometimes a conversation to be had with the third-party platforms and providers that they use in their supply chain. And you can see quite quickly how all of this becomes quite complex. And so this is really the essence of Moddule, and the platform itself is to bring all this data together. Now, in an ideal scenario, and this is quite often the case, is we're sort of given the instruction to integrate different systems, right? So that all these partners and platforms, they use various data sources, and we would integrate those data sources. That's relatively straightforward. But yeah, on occasion, there are also conversations we have to have with external stakeholders as well, and kind of manage them to make sure that they're also on board and we integrate with them in the right way.
Now, with all of that said, you've got other factors to consider. We look at geopolitical issues, we look at the climate, we look at, people in general. Everything's changing all the time. Can you tell us a little bit about how Moddule plans to stay innovative and address these emerging challenges in the future?
I think there are 2 parts to this, I think. So the 2 areas we tend to look at, and we look at these 2 areas because it's an expectation that when we speak to customers, both existing and potential new customers, they look to us as a source of strategic advice, and they trust that we bring to the table an element of sort of know-how about what's going on in the industry, which allows them, then we kind of pass that information on, and it allows them to stay, up to speed on what the industry is going through particularly at the moment, right? So how do we do that? Well, we look at, first of all, we stay on top of the industry as a whole externally. So we look at what's impacting the industry, where we get our information from, and we're constantly monitoring what's happening. Like if you take the Red Sea crisis at the moment, right, as one example, we look at instances like that. But also we look at and speak with the customers themselves. So what are they experiencing as well? So what are the challenges that they're experiencing? And that's kind of the micro level. So we've got the macro approach, which is the industry, and then we've got the micro, the conversations with the clients. And between the two, both those sort of sources of feedback and information then shape how we innovate on the tech side, right? So what do we need from a micro and macro level to ensure that the product itself is we continually innovate, and we make sure that the product stays relevant to customers, right? And that's kind of how we manage the innovation process. It's not really it's less of a kind of an idea, right? Like an idea session where we think, okay, where do we want to take the product? How do we want to innovate? And it's actually more a case of it's driven by customers and the wider sort of supply chain and what's going on there.
And tell me something, I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to ask you, starting out, what you thought was coming and what has happened. Have they tied in with each other? Has it been, has it been a completely new experience for you, or how? Tell us about that pathway, if you don't mind.
I suppose when anybody founds a company, they go in with it, they start it with you've got to have some semblance of confidence, I think, but self-belief to get started. But looking back, I realized that I really didn't, aside from industry knowledge, in terms of founding a company, I mean, I didn't have any experience in that area. So we are very different today from where we were when we first started. I learned so much along the way. And I think if I was to look back, it's really been about surrounding ourselves with the right people. We've been lucky and fortunate to work with experts, bring in sources of experience and knowledge and feedback from people who've got far more experience than we have in other areas of the business. And we've been so fortunate to be a part of kind of just sitting and being around those people. That's really been key. So I think to me, it feels, for me personally, I'm a long, long way from what I was like, what I felt I was like when I first started. But that also, I think, for me is an indicator of, okay, we're moving in the right direction. If I felt like I was the same person I was when I founded the company, well, then I probably haven't made progress anyway. So yeah, it's been quite a journey, and it's been, challenging at times, but that's where the growth is, right? So if anyone was ever sort of considering doing it, I think I would say it's definitely a steep learning curve, but it's worth it.
Fantastic. I was going to ask you that exact thing. Any words of advice? So well done. Thank you for that, Ben. Before I let you go, is there anything you'd like to tell our viewers that I may have missed? Anything you think is important or relevant that you would like to share with us?
One of the key things for me has been reaching out and learning from people who've been in the position that I wanted to be in, right? So what I mean by that is trying as much as I can to expose myself to people who were in the position I wanted to be in, and drawing upon other people's feedback and knowledge as a source of both support for me, but also inspiration for me as well. I think it's sometimes, there's maybe a reluctance to ask for support, I think, from founders. And it's important to know that, these journeys are not to be made alone. And, when you work and surround yourselves with people who, more experienced than you, that's a good thing. And I would certainly encourage any of the listeners to seek out constant feedback and support and advice from people who've been through the process that you're currently going through, because I just think there's a ton to be learned there. And there's no downside to having those kind of conversations and interacting with those kind of people.
That's fantastic. Drawing from people who have already bumped their heads and can teach
Yeah,
us those
exactly.
lessons without us making those
Yeah.
mistakes. I believe in that 100%. Ben, I just want to say thank you on behalf of myself and Riverside for joining us. Listen to me, on behalf of myself and Temi for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you, and we wish you all the best for the future.
Thank you, Matt, and thanks very much for having me.